So you think you know the Torah. It's been corrected the whole time. No mistake has ever been made, especially not with the name of Yehovah. We're about to learn some new things with Nehemiah Gordon. Welcome back to Shabbat Night Live.
Thanks, Scott.
Last week we touched on this, but we barely got into this.
Well, and we kind of ended it at it wasn't ideal where we ended it. In other words, we ended it, what maybe people were thinking, so I can't trust my Bible, which is not what I'm saying at all. What I'm saying is that you've got to go and look at the manuscripts. You have to see what the evidence shows and compare and look at all the evidence. I want to show you some examples in Torah scrolls of the precision to which the scribes went to try and preserve every letter exactly as they received it, but we can still see the traces of their process. We see the smoking guns of how things were changed.
And that's something different than previously assumed, right? Because before it was always, well, yeah, sure, you'd find corrections in a codex, but to find...
Every Torah scroll is identical. We don't even need to study them. That was the attitude. They're literally identical. There's no differences. And then we see things like spaces between verses. Some Torah scrolls have dots between verses. We've even found Torah scrolls that have vowels and accents. We found all kinds of things that aren't supposed to exist, but they do exist. They're rare, but they happen.
And it doesn't change anyone's faith. I mean, it doesn't really...
It just strengthens my faith, because now I get back to the sources and I say, okay, the Jewish people who, and I'll show you a Torah scroll from the 13th century, that in the year 1349, the Jews who used this Torah scroll were martyred for their faith. They died clinging onto the Torah scroll. There's a collection of these Torah scrolls from this town in Germany called Erfurt. And on March 21st, 1349, they were attacked by the local Catholic population. It was at the height of the Black Plague, and they saw the Catholics were dying and the Jews weren't. And we don't know why that is. Maybe it was because Jews had cats. I have no idea.
Or maybe all the washings or something.
Could have been the washing. We don't know. But the Jews weren't, at least in that particular area and time, weren't as affected by the Black Plague. The Christians, or the Catholics, became convinced the Jews are poisoning the well. That's why they were dying. They didn't know it was coming from the fleas that infected the rats. So they blamed the Jews. They went and attacked them. And these Jews held on to these scrolls in their dying moments. There's some of these scrolls from Erfurt that have burn marks on them. There's a prayer book that was open at that time that has blood on it, according to some scholars. This was discovered in the 19th century when the scholar went to Berlin, where it was held at the time, to study one of these. It's a codex in that case. And he found there were blood stains on these Hebrew manuscripts taken from the Jews of 1349. But we can see the traces, not just of blood, we can see the forensic traces of how they corrected and fixed the Torah scrolls and changed them. So let's have a look here. This is an example which shows the level of precision the scribes went to. It's Genesis 33:17, and we have what are called matris lectionis, or I call them vowel helpers. There are certain letters in Hebrew that don't change the meaning and don't change the pronunciation. They're there to tell you there's a certain vowel when you read the word. And when the scribes came along, they wanted to copy every single letter down to these vowel helpers in specific instances of specific words. Just to give you an analogy, in English we have standardized spelling. But you can spell the word color O-C-O-L-O-R or C-O-L-O-U-R. It doesn't change the meaning. It tells you, are you from England or are you from the United States? Well, imagine if in every instance of every word, they said, well, that time you spelled it with the U and that time you didn't spell it with the U. That's what these vowel helpers are. So here we have the word Sukkot, which is both the name of a city and a booth. And you can see the first time in a single verse it's spelled without the vav, and the second time it's spelled with the vav. And doesn't change the meaning. It doesn't even change the pronunciation, but the scribes wanted it preserved exactly as they received it. So if you look at virtually, and I'm going to add the word virtually, which I wouldn't have said before. I would have said every Torah scroll in the world. Now I'm going to say virtually every Torah scroll because I haven't checked everyone. You'll see, as a rule, the first instance of this word in the verse has the vav, and the second, other way around. The first instance does not have the vav, and the second one does. The one on the right doesn't, the one on the left does. Now, again, doesn't change the meaning, but they said this is what Moses wrote, this exact letter in this word of this verse, even if it's more than once in the verse, right? The same word appears twice, spelled two different ways. We have to reproduce it exactly. But things are a little bit more complicated than that. When you focus, when you zoom in, what do you find? So in the first instance of that word in the verse, originally it was written with a vav.
Aha.
Scribe came along, scratched off the vav, and now he's got a space in the middle of the word. So he scratched off the last letter, the tav, made it a wider tav. He stretched it out to fill in that space. So you can see the forensic traces of when the scribes are fixing the scrolls. It's very difficult to hide when a scribe changes something. It leaves traces behind. Sometimes you don't know what they changed, but you can tell something was changed.
That's very interesting.
And sometimes you can see exactly, as in this case, you see exactly what they changed. Here's another case. Here we again have a vowel helper, these matris lectiones. It doesn't change the meaning, it doesn't change the pronunciation. He had the word Shimoni, which is a Simeonite, somebody from the tribe of Simeon, and it had a vav in there, and the proofreader comes along, probably the original scribe, and he says, well, wait a minute, there's not supposed to be a vav in this instance. Again, it doesn't change the meaning, but they believed every letter was sacred. Some rabbis would take it one step further, and they'd say, if there's a vav or not a vav, we're going to read meaning into that extra vav. And I call it extra because it's not required there. They did that as early as Second Temple times. There's a famous example with the water libation, that the rabbis came along and they found what they call extra letters, meaning they didn't change the pronunciation or the meaning, and they said it spells out the word water. I did a thing with Michael about that, the waters of salvation.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
I'm not sure we talked about that detail, but this goes back to Second Temple times, that every letter was considered sacred, and we can see in this Torah scroll, they originally had a vav, and somebody scratched it out. I can still see that the vav was there. So the forensic traces are there. It's just so important. It gives me more confidence in my Bible. I can see not only what it says, but what it said before. And why did they change it? Well, usually they changed it because every Bible in the world, virtually, almost all Bibles in the world don't have a vav here, and so they wanted it to be uniform in accordance with what they considered the official version. Well, turns out the official version wasn't as official as they thought, because sometimes they're changing it contrary to the official version. We saw an example of that last week. It's rare, but it happens. Here he had a vav, he erased it. Here he was missing a yud. Right? And again, this doesn't change the meaning, doesn't change the pronunciation. He scratched off part of the lamed, stuck in a little tiny yud, and then had to rewrite the rest of the lamed. And I can see the forensic traces of that. Right? It's very hard to hide something in parchment.
That one's pretty messy, as a matter of fact.
A lot of them are extremely messy. Some of them are so messy, the scribe had to write in the margin. Usually this was done in a codex. They'd write in the margin, here's what I meant to do, but it's so messy you can't even read it. That actually happened. Now, we've got a bunch more examples here. A lot of times when we're looking at these things, we're kind of guessing at what the correction was. We don't always know. Sometimes you'll see an entire line that's been erased and then rewritten. Here I found something extremely rare. I found that there's these 5 words that are written smaller than all the surrounding words in the middle line there, the 4th line from the top, in this Torah scroll, and something presumably was left out. He scratched off a bunch of words and then rewrote them much smaller to squeeze in the word he was missing. Now, some scribes would write the missing word above the line. This scribe wanted to write everything on the line, and so he scratched off a bunch of words and rewrote them smaller. What word did he miss? We could only guess, except we don't have to guess this time, because in pencil, the scribe wrote, chaser et. The word et is missing. Now, well, that probably happened all the time, but in this case, the scribe left the pencil mark. Normally, that would have been erased because, pencil's not permanent. You can go and erase it. Nobody would ever know that something was written there. This scribe forgot to erase the words written in the margin. The word et is missing. So imagine the process here. The scribe is checking every letter, every word, and he comes to a certain place and there's an entire word missing, the word et. Now, et's a very interesting word. Some people call it the Aleph Tav word, right? It has the first letter of the alphabet and the last letter of the alphabet. It doesn't translate easily into English. In other words, if I say there's 10 words in the verse in Hebrew and I translate it into English, I don't have a word that parallels the word et. It's what we call a direct object marker. It has a grammatical function. It's extremely important in Hebrew. It's not always required. You can have a perfectly good sentence without it, but it helps to understand the sentence. And the word et here was accidentally left out, and the scribe left the smoking gun. I've never seen this except this one time in all the scrolls I've looked at where the scribe messed up. And I don't know when the scribe did this. Maybe it's modern pencil, right? It's very difficult to say with the information I have available right now. It's relatively recent, meaning it's the last few hundred years this was done. And by the way, that raises an interesting point. When you look at Greek manuscripts, printing comes along around the year 1450, and it begins to spread, and people stop writing manuscripts. And you have manuscripts, but they're usually the copy that was brought to the printer. That's what we call the manuscript, right? We have more Jewish manuscripts that have survived after 1450 than before 1450, which kind of blows my mind. Like, wait a minute, why would somebody in the 19th century write a manuscript? And there's two main reasons. One is that they could have lived in a country where they didn't have printing. Like the Jews of Yemen, when they came to Israel, they basically came out of the Iron Age, right? They didn't have a printing press in Yemen when the Jews came to Israel around 1950. They airlifted the Jews from this backward country to the land of Israel. Other works were written by hand because the printing press was regulated. You had censorship. And for example, some of the manuscripts of Hebrew Matthew are from after 1450. Why write a copy of Hebrew Matthew? Just print it. Because it was illegal to print. They had censorship. Sounds familiar? People have ways of getting around censorship, at least up until now they had ways, and they would do that by copying it out by hand. So Jews still write Torah scrolls by hand. So this could be modern, but it's a beautiful example of what may have happened, relatively modern, or it could be a few hundred years old. It's an example of the type of thing that would have happened in the Middle Ages where they wrote something in an impermanent way. And we can sometimes see this, that they wrote something even with ink in the margin and then scratched it off. And what did they write in the margin? Probably there's a word missing here. Come back later and fix it. So I love that we can see the traces of it. Here we have something interesting, and we have a hole in the scroll. Right, and why is there a hole? Maybe the animal, as they were scraping the animal's skin, they accidentally scratched it and put a hole in it. And so they sewed it up, and you can see the sew marks. Yep. And what we know about this is that this hole was made before the letters were written. How do I know it was before the letters were written? Because there's an aleph on top of it. And the aleph stretches very wide to cover from both sides of this tear of the hole.
On top of that,
so it predates. Then there's letters there that are squeezed in. There's letters that are stretched. This dilating and contracting we talked about with the letters in the previous program. So they have holes. Why are holes important? You'll see in a minute. Here's a hole that was sewed up, probably from before the scroll was written based on the spacing, and the hole remains sewed up. Here the hole was never sewn up. It was left. Here's a tear that, again, happened before the scroll was written. I can see from the shapes of the letters, they're written to fit the hole. So we have these tears and holes. Now, this is a different type of hole. This hole is nothing like the holes we saw before. And when I saw this, I'm like, wow, what's going on here? Now, what is going on here? We have a very common type of scribal error that happened. And I got to tell you up front, I'm guessing, because the hole consists of something cut out. And I don't have what was cut out. It's gone. But it's a reasonable guess based on the context here. And I've seen many examples like this, so you kind of get a feeling for these things. So what happened? The scribe got to the end of the line, jumped to the next line, and copied the letters Yud, He, Vav, He, the name of God, Yehovah, but he did it from the following line. So he copied it into the wrong place. Now he's got a problem. And what's his problem? So the rabbis have a law. And the law is, this isn't commanded in the Torah, but they derive it from the Torah. It's Deuteronomy chapter 12, verses 3 to 4. Let's see what it says. It says in Deuteronomy 12, tear down their altars, talking about the pagan Canaanites, smash their pillars, put their sacred posts to the fire, and cut down the images of their gods, obliterating their name from that site. Meaning the name of the pagan gods. So this idea in Deuteronomy in particular, we see in Exodus as well, that a place where God puts his name is holy. And so the place where you worship Baal, that's a place where the pagans believe Baal put the name of Baal. And Ishtar, Easter, put the name of Easter, Ashtoreth. So it says obliterating their names, the pagan gods from that site. And then it says, do not worship Yehovah your God, Yehovah your God in like manner. That's what it says in the JPS. Let's look at the King James Version. So it says, "You shall do not so unto the Lord your God," meaning unto Yehovah your God. So what is it you should not do so? And it's not entirely clear if you just read verse 4. You might say what you're not supposed to do is, what I would say, is don't build high places to Yehovah like the Canaanites built to their gods. But the rabbis say, no. When it says do not do so to Yehovah your God, what it means is destroy the names of the pagan gods, don't destroy the name Yud He Vav He. And they derive from this a rule: it is forbidden to erase God's name, even if it's written by mistake. And what do I mean by erase God's name? How do you erase a name? We saw how you erase other words in the previous program. You take a razor, a knife, and you scratch it off the surface, right? We even saw some examples today where you scratch it off. So that's forbidden in rabbinical law. So now the rabbis have a dilemma. What do? They accidentally wrote the word Yehovah from the following line on an earlier line. There's an extra instance of Yehovah. We got to fix it. How do we fix it? And this is where I was told, if that never happened, then it happened. It was completely removed. It was cut out of the scroll. Nonsense. That one word was cut out of the scroll, not the whole column. Right, not the whole sheet.
Because I'd heard if they messed up the name of Yehovah, they'd have to destroy the whole scroll.
No,
but that's not true.
Utter nonsense. In fact, it's here's where it comes from. There's something called a mezuzah, which is what you put on the doorpost. And there's phylacteries, which are Yeshua mentions phylacteries, right? It's the thing the rabbis wear on their forehead and on their hand, and it has tiny little scrolls in it. And those have to be written sequentially. And what do I mean sequentially? It's actually kind of like a magic amulet, to be honest. Okay. So you write the first word, and then you write the second word, and you write the third word. Well, what if I forgot the second word? Okay, no problem. I'll scratch off the third word and write the second word and third word, right? You can do that. But what if one of those words is Yehovah? Well, now I'm done. I can't erase Yehovah. So if you do it in phylacteries, you're done. You got to start over. But it's only a paragraph. This Torah scroll is, this particular one is 50 sheets, right? That's like 25 sheep. I'm assuming it's, or cows in this case, right? 25 cows, right? Each half of the cow is one of the sheets. 25 cows or bulls donated the sheets for this Torah scroll. And when they made a mistake in the word Yud He Vav He, they took a razor and they cut that word out. Now, I had been in conversations with scholars about this, and I'd heard about this, I'd read about it. I said, can you show me an example? And they said, well, no, we don't have any examples. I've seen it, but I don't know any examples. I said, tell me the library. I'll go to that library and I'll find it. If you say you've seen it somewhere. One scholar said to me, I have no idea. I've seen hundreds of scrolls, thousands of scrolls, don't know where. So I went looking for it and I found it. And here's a scroll that has it. Now I found it in numerous scrolls, more than I can count. But here's an example where they cut God's name out, not to disgrace it or to desecrate it, but because it was too holy to destroy. And then you say,
so that's not destroying it?
No, not at all, because they kept that little piece of parchment. And we're told in medieval sources what to do with that piece of parchment. You take glue, literally glue, put it on the back of that little piece, right? It's a single word piece of parchment. And you can do two things that I know of, at least. One is you stick it onto the side of the ark, which is the cabinet in which you keep a Torah scroll. I haven't found any examples of that, but it's mentioned in the ancient medieval literature. The other thing you can do is you glue it to the back of another Torah scroll. And I found two examples of that so far, where there's just a word glued on the back of a Torah scroll, and it's the name of God.
Wow.
Pretty cool stuff.
That is very cool. I had no idea that was done. So we are now destroying sacred cows, as it were.
Well, what we're doing is correcting an error in the text by not defacing God's name based on this rabbinical interpretation, which I don't agree with, right? But the way they read Deuteronomy 12:3-4 is it's forbidden to erase God's name even when it's a mistake. Okay, in that case, preserve that word. Don't destroy the word, but cut it out and put it somewhere else. You got to remove it from the scroll because it's an error.
And even celebrating it at that point, really, to put it on the back of a scroll or so.
Preserving it in a holy way where God's name won't be stepped on or destroyed.
That's amazing. Okay, Nehemiah, would you hang on with us?
Absolutely.
Okay, we'll be right back. All right, so thank you for hanging on with us as well. This is fascinating information. I'm learning about some things. I'm hoping you are too. And we have more to come in the second half of Shabbat Night Live, but we just want to take this time to ask you to donate to Shabbat Night Live, because without you, Nehemiah can't be here. We can't have Shabbat Night Live. So we want to thank you, and you are not only providing this program so that you can watch it, but so that others can watch it into the future. So we want to give you a couple minutes to pray about a donation to this ministry so we can continue doing what we do here, and we'll be back in just a couple minutes. Thank you.